Welcome to Observation for the Nation, and for a little change I have a guest on tonight, and Mark Collett. Some of you may know Mark, others may not know of him at all, so if you can just give a quick introduction.
Well, I'm a British nationalist. I've been a nationalist for the best part of 2 decades. I was involved in the British National Party from the year 2000. I was initially the British National Party youth organiser. I did that for some time. Eventually, I ended up as the party's head of publicity, and I was most famously taken to court. I was arrested at the end of 2004 and spent several years in and out of court for exposing the child grooming scandal in Keighley, because what seems to have been lost to sort of the sands of time was it was initially the BNP in the Keighley and Bradford area that exposed the grooming scandal as far back as 2004, and I faced 8 counts of incitement to racial hatred at Leeds Crown Court and potentially 7 years in jail for making speeches in the run-up to the European election in 2004 exposing the grooming scandal in the Keighley and Bradford area. After that, I became the party's head of publicity, and I was the guy that designed the leaflets for the big election victories in Barking and Dagenham at the GLA in 2008, and of course the 2 MEP wins for the BNP back in 2009. I was the BNP in 2010, and since then I have worked with a variety of different groups and parties, and now I run my own YouTube channel, which you can find quite easily by just Googling my name, Mark Collett. I also have a Twitter account, and I wrote a book called The Fall of Western Man, which you can get for free from www.thefallofwesternman.com. And if you like it, you can always buy a copy. It's available in paperback on Amazon and hardback on Lulu. But if you just want to try it out, feel free to download a copy.
Fantastic, thank you. People, so right away people are going to say, what the hell is she doing talking to Mark Collett? He's BNP, he's a Nazi, he's a real Nazi as opposed to the fake Nazis that we have. And I think it's really interesting that you talk about the grooming gangs, because that's where my passion lies, raising awareness, and how you're smeared. So you have been raising awareness as far back as 2004, you said?
Yeah, well, the British National Party were the ones that broke the story, because when the grooming scandal really started to become unearthed, the epicenter of it at the time was in Keighley, and there was actually a documentary made, I think it might have been Channel 4, that sort of scratched the surface of this. And young girls were being collected from outside schools, and they were being taken up to the sort of, Keighley's quite sort of an elevated area. They were being taken up to sort of like the hills around the area by men usually of Pakistani Muslim origin, and taken up to these areas, and they were being abused. And obviously the usual areas or the usual places were also involved, kebab houses, places they'd take the girls, they'd buy them food often. And initially the girls would think that they were their girlfriends, that they were liked, that they were loved. They would be given free food, free alcohol. They were allowed to sit in these guys' cars, often quite nice vehicles, keep themselves warm on a cold evening because they didn't want to be at home. Many of these girls came from broken homes, didn't like to be at home very much, wandered the streets late at night. So being taken in by somebody who would allow you to sit in their car, give you free food, free drink, you'd think it was quite a good thing. These people were quite kind, but that kindness wasn't real kindness. It wasn't genuine kindness. It was there to fool these girls into a false sense of security. And later these girls would be horrifically abused. And we exposed this, and we campaigned on the issue of the grooming gangs on a political level. And we got 2 councillors elected in the Keighley area, one called Chris Kirby, just outside Keighley, and one in one of the actual Keighley seats. Her name was Angela Clark, and she had a young daughter and a son, and we worked there quite tirelessly, actually, to raise these issues. But at the end of 2004, after the European elections, myself and Nick Griffin were arrested for speeches we made in the run-up to those elections where we discussed the grooming gang issue. These were speeches made at private meetings, and we spent, I think the case finally concluded in 2007, so it took an awful awful long time for it to be concluded, because we faced trial and we were found not guilty on half the charges, but then the court system, the state, demanded that we faced retrial on the other half, which were undecided. So we spent more time in and out of court. But finally, it was all over. I was found unanimously not guilty on all 8 charges. But we were the ones that initially blew the whistle on this. And then the Rotherham scandal came to light. And it was a very... sadly, she's not with us anymore. Her name was Marlene Guest. She was a tireless campaigner for the British National Party. She worked, she was a good friend of mine as well. Sadly, she's passed away now. I always remember when I used to do her leaflets, she was such a lovely lady. I'd always drive them down for her because she didn't have, she couldn't get up to Leeds to collect them. So I'd always drive them down, and she always used to know what things that I used to like to eat, because we used to spend a lot of time together and we discussed food and other things. And she'd always get me some really nice black pudding from the butchers in Rotherham who handmade it. And she used to give me a huge amount of it. And sometimes I'd even struggle to eat it, but that was like a little thank you for the delivery service. But I always did as much as I could to help Marlene, because she was on her own and she did such sterling work for the party. And she really was tireless. I mean, she must have put out tens and tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of leaflets on her own. And many of those leaflets were dealing with the grooming scandal. Then obviously it broke nationally just how big the Rotherham issue was. But Marlene was campaigning on the issue of grooming in Rotherham long before it was a big story in the national media.
So why was it ignored? And it just kind of, it's actually just really sad that you've been campaigning and trying to raise awareness since as far back as 2004, and you're smeared, because that's what it is, you're smeared as BNP is racist, BNP are Nazis. Don't even look at BNP, don't talk to anybody that's from the BNP, because you can't, like, you know, because obviously I'm the daughter of an immigrant, my dad is from Pakistan, and it just, you know, what's the reason behind that? Just to stop us discussing? Because other people have came along since and are trying to raise awareness on the Muslim rape gangs, and they too are smeared in mainstream media as being racist, as being far right, as being bigots.
Well, I think the smearing is just a way to silence people, because at the moment there is a huge push for enforced multiculturalism in every Western nation, open borders, enforced multiculturalism, and there's huge incentives being given by governments to entice people from the third world and the Middle East to come to Western nations. And this is having a profound effect on us. We are seeing white people become a minority in their ancestral homelands. We are seeing this huge population boom, which is driven solely by the immigrant population and the birth rate of the immigrant population. And there is also all these other side effects, things like the grooming gangs, things like the lack of spaces in schools, things like health tourism, which is costing the country millions, if not billions every year in sort of fraudulent claims on the NHS. And there's a whole wealth of other negatives associated with this. But the multiculturalists, the establishment, the media, the press, they are so intent on pushing this multicultural project forward. They're so intent on ensuring that white people become minorities in their own homelands that anyone that speaks out against it and anyone that highlights any of the negatives which are brought about by mass immigration, they are just smeared relentlessly and silenced. And when they talk to you or try and debate with you, or any issues are brought up, they never talk in normal terms. They never talk about issues. They never talk about facts. They never talk about figures. They never talk about the effects of mass immigration or the way it affects the indigenous people. All they deal with is slurs. All they deal in is these absolute terms which are invented to silence people. So people call you an Islamophobe. They call you a racist. They call you an anti-Semite. They call you a bigot, because they don't want to debate the facts. They don't want to talk about actual issues. They don't want to talk about problems. And they certainly don't want anyone who has solutions to these problems, or anyone who acts in the interests of the indigenous European people, having a platform and being able to speak freely. And it really is quite amazing, because when you see the levels of support that we actually have, If we could openly organise, if we could just book a meeting hall in the middle of a city and we had proper protections, proper rights, and we could organise freely, I think we'd have tens and tens of thousands of people clamouring to get into that meeting hall. And when I used to travel around in the early 2000s, speaking at meetings in places like Keighley, these pubs were so full, people couldn't get in the door. There was standing room only. Sometimes would be a queue outside of people just trying to get in. They would almost be standing on top of each other to hear what we had to say, because there is no one, or back then there was no one, other than the BNP, who was even willing to talk about this. And the BNP seems to have got this bizarre negative reputation. But you've got to remember, the BNP had 56 councillors, it had one councillor, it had 2 MEPs, it had a seat on the GLA, and it had hundreds of parish and town councillors, which is the level beneath your sort of regular city councillor. I mean, my mum was a BNP councillor for 8 years in the village of Rothley. We were embedded at all levels of society, and we were campaigning on a variety of issues. But because we stood up for the indigenous British people, and because we would talk about problems the establishment were all too happy to ignore, we were branded as racists. And now, you know, from a historical perspective, anyone that talks about the BNP, or anyone who presents sort of a historical perspective on the BNP, they seem incapable of doing so without using the word racist.
It's just, you know, talking about all the smears and the slurs. So I've never been called an anti-Semite, but the last few weeks, the last month or so, you know, I wrote an article called Hypocrisy. So, you know, so I'm an anti-Semite. I don't hate Jews. I don't want any violence towards Jews. Of course I don't. I don't want any violence towards anybody, really. The only people that I want to see, you know, violence towards is paedophiles. They're the only people I hate. They abuse children. I hate them. I'll stand by that. If there was paedophiles getting beaten black and blue at the bottom of my street, I don't care. You know, I honestly wouldn't care. But if I seen other sorts of violence, then it would bother me. So to be called an anti-Semite because I am not pro-Israel, or because I want to question, you know, Jews or Judaism, it's just nonsense. I wrote an article on Frankfurt School theory. I'd never heard of Frankfurt School theory until a few years ago, probably year before last, and I looked into it, and it just really hit home with me, because every point that I was reading, so I would look at the Frankfurt School theory and all these points you could tick off in society today. Every point has been achieved in the UK. And somebody asked me when I became an anti-Semite because I wrote an article on the Frankfurt School theory. There's absolutely nothing in my article that says hate Jews, or, you know, get rid of Jews out of the UK. And I don't hate, like I said, I don't hate anybody, but you know, you really see it when you start questioning things. If you're not sheep and follow blindly, wrong think, you know, the left and the far left are really good at calling me racist, Islamophobe, fascist, bigot, hate preacher. You know, there's a whole list of names they call me, because I talk about Islam and because I talk about the rape gangs, and that we have a problem with paedophilia. Of course we do. We also have a problem with, you know, Muslim rape gangs. So if I sat here and all day, every day I spoke about the Catholic Church and the paedophiles in the Catholic Church, nobody would call me a Catholic phobe or a hate preacher or a fascist or a racist. They would all agree with me. But because I talk about Islam and because I talk about Muslims, the left and the far left call me these names, but the right and the far right never say anything. Nothing. They applaud me. Yeah, look at her, how brave she is. Oh, she's an apostate from Islam. Isn't she wonderful? Then I talk about Jews and Judaism, and I think, you know, we've got Islamophobia and we have laws to protect Jewish people from criticism. And then all of a sudden, I'm not welcome in the movement, and, you know, where's your Israeli flag? And it's just crazy. And, you know, a lot of the people that are shouting and trying to shut me down from our side of you know, have probably never even been to Israel. You know, and they're all pro-Israel and Zionists, so you put Israel first. Where is the love for your own country? You know, I get loads of people on the right and the far right saying, you know, you're not British, and you know, your dad's a Paki. I can say that on my show, Mark. So, you know, your dad's a Paki and you're not British, and you know, go back to Pakistan, you mongrel, you're not welcome here. But it doesn't bother me, I'm British. They can't take that away from me. I'm very British, and I'm very proud of being in Britain, and Britain comes first. Pakistan doesn't come first. Israel doesn't come first. Palestine doesn't come first. I'm neither pro. So when I say I'm not pro-Israel, you know, they have the crying, salty, far right tears, but I'm not pro-Palestine either. And I think, you know, there's a lot of people in the movement that detest Islam and Muslims so much that they'll be pro-Israel just to go against Palestine, not realising that there's actually Christians in Palestine as well that suffer. So
there is this huge hypocrisy in, especially in the anti-Islam movement in the UK, especially amongst Tommy Robinson supporters, that somehow Israel is the great ally of the British people, that Israel is in fact a nation that smiles upon people like Tommy Robinson, and that Jews are an ally of our cause. Well, in fact, this isn't strictly true. And when you actually look at the effect that not all Jews, but Jews as a whole have had on Western society, especially through outlets like the Frankfurt School, it certainly hasn't been positive. And when you look at the effect Jews have had on mass immigration, you will find that most Jewish groups, especially the powerful ones, have actually campaigned for more Muslims to come to the West. I mean, in America, there is a group called the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, and they got 1,500 rabbis to sign an open letter expressing their desire to bring more Muslims to the US. I mean, here in the UK, the most powerful Jewish group is the British Board of Deputies. And the British Board of Deputies has consistently campaigned for more rights for so-called refugees and for Britain to take more refugees. Yet at the same time, they have campaigned for the state of Israel to be protected, for the state of Israel to get special privileges and to be smiled upon by the British state. And there are other hypocrisies as well. I mean, I know that Tommy Robinson has done fantastic work exposing Muslim grooming gangs, but what about the case of Jeffrey Epstein? Well, Jeffrey Epstein is a Jewish paedophile and sex slaver who has links with people in the American establishment, ex-presidents, even members of the British royal family have met him. Now, he is probably one of the most notorious and powerful paedophiles and sex slavers in modern history. And anyone that wants to Google his case and look into him, they will see that he has powerful links with the state of Israel, and most likely was providing intel on politicians, leading dignitaries, Hollywood A-listers, and other deviants within the establishment who were using his services, using his sex slaves, and he was providing dirt files on those individuals to the state of Israel so that politicians and national figureheads could be essentially blackmailed to do Israel's bidding. Then there are things such as the case of oral suction. Well, we often talk about the sick practices that go on within Islam. We talk about things such as female genital mutilation. Well, I'm sure that any of your viewers who Google oral suction will see that there is a branch of Orthodox Judaism that after circumcising young boys in synagogues, the rabbis actually suck the penis of the young boy to remove any blood from the penis. Well, I can tell you this, if Muslims were doing that, Tommy Robinson would not shut up about it. In fact, if Muslims were doing something like that in Western nations, he wouldn't stop talking about it. He would be outside of every mosque where that was taking place. But because it's Jews doing it, he won't say a word. And there is this very, very damaging hypocrisy within the right-wing movement, especially within the counter-jihad movement, and that is because it has been co-opted by people like Ezra Levant, people like Avi Yemeni, and people like Pamela Geller, and all of these people claim to be acting in our best interests, but all of these people have a greater loyalty to the state of Israel than they do to the countries that they reside in. Avi Yemeni has a greater loyalty to Israel than he does to Australia. I'm sure that Ezra Levant has a greater loyalty to Israel than he does to Canada. And all of this is very, very worrying, especially when you see that Israel has such a vast, vast influence over American politics. And if you just look at one of the pro-Israel lobbies, AIPAC, you can see that they essentially control American politics. I made an entire video on this. It's 30 minutes long, so it'd be very difficult for me to explain the ins and outs of AIPAC. But all of these things are essentially ignored by the counter-jihad group, ignored by large portions of Tommy Robinson's supporters. But you cannot deny the role or the disproportionate role. I'm not saying all Jews, but Jews.
But this is it. So when we talk about Islam and Muslims, nobody ever on the right says, not all Muslims. We know it's not all Muslims. Of course, not all Muslims rape, and of course, not all Muslims are terrorists, because the world would be in a far worse state. You know, if all Muslims, you know, you've got old Muslims, young Muslims, men, women. So to say all Muslims rape is ridiculous, but to have to say not all is ridiculous as well. You should just know. So, you know, the sucking of the baby boy's penis, you know, I didn't know that either, because it's not something that's put in mainstream media, and it's not something that people talk about, because when you talk about it, you get accused of being a Jew hater, you get accused of being an anti-Semite, you get accused of, you know, wanting to kill all Jews because you're talking about this one issue. So it's obvious not all Jews do it, but all Jews circumcise their baby boys.
Firstly, and I've said this before when I've been on debates with Jews about Jewish power and Jewish influence, people regularly say that Americans were involved in slavery. And they say Americans as if it was all Americans. Well, at the height of the transatlantic slave trade, I think it was only about 1.4% of all free Americans owned slaves. And that's a tiny, tiny proportion of Americans who own slaves. But people will regularly say, Americans were involved in the slave trade. Americans must pay reparations for the slave trade. Americans are responsible for the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade. But only 1.4% of them were involved. But it's a coverall term. No one says not all Americans. Oh, well, some Americans, a tiny percentage of Americans, and it was only a tiny percentage. But when you speak to counter-jihadists, they talk about Islam. They talk about the menace of Islam. They talk about the Muslim problem. They talk about Muslim immigration. They never say not all. But when you talk about Jews, you have to be very careful to say not all, because you don't want to end up in any form of trouble. And these people will aggressively pursue you because they are constantly trying to pass laws that clamp down on freedom of speech and even prevent you talking about Israel in a negative manner. I mean, how absurd is that? That here in the UK, you can criticize the UK as much as you want, but under new anti-Semitism legislation, you are classed as an anti-Semite if you criticize the state of Israel or Zionism. And Zionism is just really a political philosophy of Israel first. Well, if you criticize that political philosophy of Israel first, you're an anti-Semite. Well, you can criticize America first, you can criticize Britain first, you could criticize Germany first, but you can't criticize Israel first. And when you look at the disproportionate role Jews have played in bringing migrants to Europe, it is very, very frightening. And I've got a quote here from a Jewish lady called Barbara Lerner-Spector. And she said, Europe is not going to be the monolithic societies they once were in the last century. Jews are going to be at the center of that. It's a huge transformation for Europe to make. Jews will be resented because of our leading role, but without that leading role and without that transformation, Europe will not survive. And there's a really important point to what I've just read, and it's that these people aren't shy about admitting that they are playing a leading role in multiculturalizing Europe, playing a leading role in bringing migrants to Europe. And there are even groups like Israel Aid, and I'm sure many of your viewers won't have heard of Israel Aid, but Israel Aid are a very interesting group because they're an Israeli pro-refugee group. And your listeners or your viewers might be thinking to themselves, well, surely they're campaigning for refugees to come to Israel. Well, you'd be wrong if you thought that. Israel Aid is a Jewish refugee charity that sends Jewish volunteers to Europe to encourage migrants to come to Europe. So that to me seems like the ultimate hypocrisy, that even Jews from Israel who are pro-refugee are only pro-refugee when those refugees are coming to European nations. And Israel Aid operate in Greece, they operate in Italy, they do their best to try and get immigrants in. They are an NGO, they try to disperse those immigrants across European borders, across the Schengen zone, so they can't be found. They are facilitating the invasion of Europe, but at the same time, when they are finished with their work, they get to return to a walled state in the Middle East, which is an ethno-state, which exists for the good of the Jewish people, and a state which doesn't allow mass immigration. And when migrants do make it to Israel, Israel has a series of policies to help with voluntary or paid repatriation to ensure that immigrants don't remain in Israel. And all of these hypocrisies are quite startling, because Jews often support the state of Israel, overwhelmingly in the UK. I think the British Board of Deputies claimed that over 90% of Jews support the state of Israel. Over 90% of UK Jews support the state of Israel. So they overwhelmingly support their own ethno-state, an ethnocentric place where they can enjoy their culture, their heritage, and their tradition. And I've got nothing against people having a place where they can surround themselves with their own folk, their own traditions, their own heritage. But the fact of the matter is, those same people who support a state for the Jews often support mass immigration for Britain. And the British Board of Deputies, the most powerful Jewish group in the UK, supports the state of Israel, but also supports mass immigration for the UK. And I think that's a huge hypocrisy, because it's almost like one rule for us and one rule for you. You guys take all the refugees and that'll enrich you, but don't expect us to take any, because if we do, that could water down our bloodline, that could water down our ethnicity, that could damage our ethnic cohesion. And I think that's very unfair, because I don't think I'm calling for anything too radical when I say that the indigenous people of Europe have a right to their own homelands too.
But didn't Dalai Lama say it as well?
He certainly did.
Yeah, so so it's okay for him to say it, but not for the people of Britain to want that. It's the whole hypocrisy that got me really looking into it. So you and I can be sitting here and spend the next however long we're going to spend chatting and just talk about Islam and Muslims and FGM and forced marriage and Muslim rape gangs and, a number of things, and people will watch it and think, oh, that was great, they touched on really interesting topics, didn't know about that, didn't know about this. But loads of people will just switch off from this one because we're mentioning things that, people have been brainwashed into never discussing. You can't discuss. I got thrown out of a group chat quite a while back. Somebody had asked a question in it on Telegram, and somebody had asked a question, like, who controls the media? And I put in a question and said, is it the Jews? Question mark. So it's a question, simple question. Is it the Jews? It's not an accusation. I'm not saying it's a fact. There's a debate going on. So, let's open it up. And I got thrown out after I got abused and I said, but, we can talk about Islam, again, back to that. We can talk about Islam, we can talk about Christianity, we can talk about Sikhs. And their reasoning for why we can never question Jewish people or Judaism is because of the Holocaust. Because of what happened to these poor Jewish people in the Holocaust. they have to get a free pass for forevermore, which I thought was quite interesting. So we can't, you know, the billionaire that's up in the sex slaver, so we can't criticise him either. He's Jewish. So do we allow him just to get away with that because he maybe had a great grandma that perished in the Holocaust? So we've got to forgive him for everything he's done. They all get a free pass. Just nonsense, absolute nonsense. So yeah, so that's where then I started really questioning and looking and thinking. So you've got however many countries there are in the world where if I go to those countries and say I'm an apostate from Islam, I can either be flogged, I can be stoned to death, I can be put in jail. You know, my life wouldn't be safe to go to a Muslim majority country and say that I'm an apostate from Islam. And I didn't even know that there are countries in the world where if I go and say the Holocaust wasn't real, I don't believe in it, I can go to jail as well. But I can go anywhere in the world really and say anything insulting about Jesus, say that Jesus is not real, I don't believe in Jesus, God is fake, God is a woman, you know, nothing happens. And that's where I came from it, just very open-minded to think, well, if I can say this, then why can't I say this? And started, you know, questioning, and it can become a really lonely place because so many people then just distance themselves because they think it's contagious. It's catching what you've got, this, you know, label that I've been newly smeared with.
Well, the truth is definitely contagious, and what you're saying is definitely true. If you look at who owns the American media, and especially Hollywood, Jews are absolutely overrepresented to a huge degree in Hollywood, the press, and the media. You've got to remember, Jews make up about 2% of the American population. But when you look at American directors, American actors, actresses, the people who own the huge media conglomerations in America, they are nearly all Jews. And they control it like a Jewish dynasty. And those people are responsible for what trickles down to news feeds all over the world, because the American media set the agenda when it comes to news. And these people are overwhelmingly pro refugees, so-called refugees coming here to the West. They are pro-Muslim refugees flooding Western countries. I mean, I've got a collection of headlines here from a Jewish publication called Forward, and I'll just read them to you. I'll read some of them to you. I've got about a dozen here. Jews unite to defend policy on Syrian refugees, with a few exceptions. Jewish groups lend push to crack open doors to Syria refugees. Citing Holocaust, Swiss Jews demand open door for migrants. French Jews plan coordinated push to help Syrian refugees. Jews push Washington to admit more Syrian refugees, even as some worry about backlash. Over 1,000 US rabbis petition lawmakers to welcome refugees. Dutch Jewish refugee village may shelter Syrians. And it goes on and on and on. And I've got dozens and dozens of these articles from Jewish publications calling for Jews to push for more migration, and also praising Jews that do call for more mass immigration. And this is something that has to be discussed, and it has to be discussed in a reasoned and open manner, because at the moment, the counter-jihad movement and those around Tommy Robinson simply will not discuss these facts. They won't discuss these big issues. And it's all well and good putting all the blame on Muslims and making Islam the big bogeyman. Now, of course, Islam is not compatible with the West. I don't believe Islam is a good match for the Western world. I believe that Islamic values and traditional European Christian values are often diametrically opposed. But we also must look at the people who have pushed for open borders, because it's not some giant accident that all of this has happened. Mass migration isn't accidental. It has been managed, It has been something that has been promoted, and people who are coming here are enticed to come here. Now, I made a video some time ago that Tommy Robinson initially shared. He initially copied and put it up on his YouTube and then removed it. I'm sure, I've got nothing against him using it. I think Tommy's done some fantastic work, and I was very flattered that he copied it and put it up. And it was about Muslims and the benefit system. Now, I had a friend who was working within the benefit system, and they got me a document that they'd been issued, and they sent it over to me, and it showed quite clearly how Muslims could essentially cheat the benefit system by citing religious objections to working. So at a time when the Conservatives were bringing in austerity, at a time when it was becoming much, much harder for the indigenous people of Britain to find their way into the benefit system, and there was large, really quite large penalties for people who walked out of jobs. Ultimately, you know, if you were white, if you're a white Christian, you walked out of work, you could spend months not being allowed to claim benefits. You could essentially be left to starve because you'd walked out of your job. And the Conservatives were saying, if you walk out of paid employment, you will not be given benefits. You will not be rewarded for giving up a job. And then there was a little asterisk. And underneath it said, except if you're Muslim. And there was all these rules about Muslims in the workplace and what would give them an exception and allow them to walk out of their job. So quite simply, it said, if a Muslim man was working at, and this was one of the examples they gave, if a Muslim man was working at a company and he objected to sitting next to a female who wasn't in a headscarf or wasn't in traditional Muslim dress, he could walk out of work, quit his work, and he would be allowed to go on benefits immediately, because it would be religiously insensitive to suggest that he should carry on working in that environment. So when you have a government that is basically tabling these laws, that's writing these laws that discriminate against the indigenous population and essentially make Muslims first-class citizens, making people like myself second-class citizens, you've got to say, we're attracting these people to come here. And we attract these.
So if you were an immigrant, you know, if you were living in the third world and somebody said to you, come to Britain and we're going to give you benefits, you don't ever need to work, you can stay in benefits for life, we're going to give you free healthcare, you can have children and they'll get free education, we'll give you a house, and you're going to come. Of course they're going to come.
There's lots more little benefits as well. I mean, here's another one that people don't cite too often. But the British government has basically tried to adopt parts of Sharia law and be very kind to places that practice it. But one area they won't adopt of Sharia law is Islamic marriage. And that's very interesting, because you might say, oh, well, good on the British government for not adopting Islamic marriage. You know, good on them. Well, actually, it's not good on them at all. Yeah. And they very carefully not adopted that part of the law, because it means Muslim men do not get prosecuted for bigamy. They do not get prosecuted for having more than one wife. In fact, their second, third, fourth, or however many wives they've got are actually classed as single mothers, because they're only wives through a Sharia court. But this gives them immense power. So if you have one wife that is legally registered as your wife under UK law, but then you have two other wives that you have registered under Sharia law, which doesn't count under UK law, those two wives then get to claim single parent benefits. So what you have is a Muslim man and his first wife, they get a council house. His second wife, under Sharia law, gets a council house to herself. And his third wife, under Sharia law, gets a council house to herself. And the government doesn't acknowledge the second two marital links. So here you've got a man who, because the government won't acknowledge the Sharia marital links, won't clamp down on Sharia courts, won't expose Sharia courts, won't stop this bigamy, which is against the law, you have one man who essentially owns 3 properties courtesy of the British state. So you have 2 women who essentially have properties on the government, and these properties get bigger and bigger the more children they have. But if they move in with him, if they move in with him and all the women, the husband and the children live in one house, he then has 2 properties to rent out. So essentially what the government is doing is making Muslim men who practice bigamy, who have 2nd and 3rd marriages under the auspices of a Sharia court, they're giving them the right to be a landlord. They're setting them up as landlords. And this is taking place. Well, it's taking place all over the UK. And I think there was a case in London. I think it was in London. And there was a case where a Muslim man, he had several wives. I think it was 2. And he'd been on a terror watch list, or he'd been up on some kind of terror charges. But he had 2 flats, 1 for each wife. And obviously, if both of them were living in 1 flat, he'd got 1 to rent out and make some extra cash. So he's making the benefits. He's got his 2 flats. Both women are getting the benefits. One's getting single parent benefit, and then he's got a flat to rent out on top of that. And then people are saying, well, you know, these leftists, these liberals, these people in the media are saying, oh, Britain's such a racist country. It's so unwelcoming towards migrants and minorities. Unwelcoming? Unwelcoming. If there was a European country that said to me, Mark, you come and live here. We'll give you a free house. You can bring 2 women. You can get another free house and you can rent that one out. We'll give you all the benefits you want. When your wives go into labour, we'll give you free interpreters. We'll pay for your education. We'll pay for your healthcare. You'd be like, where can I sign? Yeah. Give me the pen. You'd be packing. And what makes it worse is these people aren't coming from other developed nations. They're coming from places like Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, places where none of these things would be on offer unless you were extremely wealthy. You know, you would not get...
They come from countries where if you don't have any money, you don't eat. Simple. If you don't have any money and you are really, really ill, then you stay ill. You don't have money for medicine, you don't have money to educate your children, and then they're coming to, you know, the most racist country in the world. Like you said, Britain, you know, you've got people like David Lammy, Diane Abbott, banging on about how racist Britain is. Britain is like the least racist country. Of course there'll be people that are racist, of course, you know, goes without saying. But you, as a white man, try go living in Pakistan, try go living in villages in Pakistan, you know, like we spoke, Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, you know, then you'll experience real racism. It's absolute nonsense. I often speak about this, that, you know, I live in a predominantly white area, and obviously I'm not the most whitest person. I'm obviously really brown. No, you know, it's very, very rare. I met an old man last week and he asked me where I was from, and I told him, and he said, no, you're not from here, hen. Where are you from? Because he obviously seen, you know, and it wasn't, he didn't, you know, there's other brown people that would pull the race card out and say racist. He didn't do it in a racist way, he didn't do it in an insulting way, he didn't do it to be nasty, he was genuinely interested in where I was from. And I said to him, my dad is from Kashmir. And he then was really nice, and oh, you've got beautiful eyes, and blah, 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 blah. You know, once in a blue moon, somebody will ask me where I'm from. I open my mouth, I sound Scottish, I'm Glaswegian, so people just, you know, accept. I don't go out and about with a race card. I don't own a race card. If somebody calls me a Paki, I don't care. I honestly don't care. You know, it's just a word. If somebody calls me a smelly Paki bastard, then yeah, they're a bit nasty. Are they racist? No, they're just stupid. They're idiots. They're uneducated, whatever. I'm really, really welcome in my little home, in my area. My daughter goes to school, and in the you know, she's going into high school after the summer. Once in the whole of her primary school education, once, and it was just a girl being a bitch. That was all it was. Just, you know, what you maybe don't know, but little girls are a nightmare. An absolute nightmare. The bitching is unbelievable. And there was an argument between her and this other little girl. They had a little fallout, and she turned around and said to her, I don't like people with brown skin. And the voice at the table said, That's not nice. You can't say that to her. That's racist. If you don't like her, that's fair enough, but you can't not like her because she's got brown skin. And my little one came home and said to me, do you know what racist means? Because she just heard that word for the first time. So, you know, we're very much accepted because I integrate. So I go out and about, you know, you walk by people, you walk by the same people every day. After a little while, you say hello. It's just manners. You say hello, how you doing? Eventually, you know, just, I don't own a race card. It's not a racist country. Like I said, I think I said on your show, if somebody gets on the bus and doesn't sit next to me, it's not because they're racist. It's not because I'm brown. You know, if somebody walks by, if I go to collect the little one from school and none of the mums talk to me, it's not because they're racist. You know, and it's that attitude that people have. A lot of brown people have that attitude. A lot of black people have that. You know, I like to say black, are you? People of colour. That you didn't speak to me, you didn't say hi to me when you walked past, you know, you crossed the road when you saw me coming. It's because I'm black, because I'm brown. Is it because I'm black? It's just nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. That's my little bit on it.
Well, there's something you said that's really interesting there. You said that a guy said to you, oh no, where are you from? You know, sort of what's your heritage? And, you know, you weren't offended by that. And I don't really think it was an offensive question, because if I happened to be living in Nigeria, you know, if I settled down with a woman and had some children, I thought, you know what, it'd be a real great place for me to take my family to. We'll go and live in Nigeria. And I was living in Nigeria, and we had another child in Nigeria who would obviously be but white as well, you know. And one day a little boy said to my daughter, who had been born in Nigeria, where are you from? That would just be a normal question. You know, she'd obviously say, oh, you know, well, you know, we're originally from England. You know, my mum and dad are from England. You know, I'm English. You know, that's my ethnicity. That's my heritage. And I don't think anyone would take any offense at that. You know, if I went to Pakistan and, you know, lived there and somebody said, you know, where are you from? I wouldn't be, oh my gosh, are you saying that I'm not, I'm not Pakistani? I'd be, oh, you know, I'm from the UK. That's where I come from. I'm English. And it's not a big issue. But what we've done today is we've turned very normal things into huge, huge issues. It's like the term, use the term Paki. I mean, I don't use that on my show. You used it on my show, which I was very annoyed about.
I had to use it in that context, so, you know.
It's an abbreviation. It's like Brit. You know, if somebody said to me, oh, you know, you're a Brit, I wouldn't be throwing a paddy and running down to the police station. You know,
they call each other it, you know, so when I used to be part of, or tried to be part of the Pakistani community, they call each other it, you know, that Paki this and that Paki that and blah, 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 blah. And it's the same as the N-word that you're not allowed to say. They call each other it and they rap about it and they sing about it. So people of colour, black people of colour is just another load of nonsense. Black people rap about it and sing about it. And if my daughter went out and bought, you know, not that she would, but if she went out and bought a rap song and was singing along to it and said that, sang the N-word, because I think this happened to some girl, didn't it? She sang the song and sang about niggers because it was in the song and she was singing it because it's just a song. And she got absolutely slated for that. I think she got into a lot of trouble for that. And it's so, when you sing along to your favourite rap song, do you just beat the N-word out? How do you sing it without saying the N-word? So they're okay. So the black rappers are okay for you to part with your money and buy their albums and buy their songs, but you can't sing, yo, slap my nigger up, or whatever. It's ridiculous. It's do you know what? It's just, and I keep going back to Frankfurt School theory and all those points. So everything that we've been talking about, while we've been talking, I'm thinking, oh, I think that's point 4 in the Frankfurt School theory. I think that might be point 1 in the Frankfurt School theory. So it's just, clown world is really the only word I can use to describe it.
Well, it's very interesting because when you talk about language and policing language, if we wanted to be this big rainbow multicultural family that all got on, we would have a set of rules which were enforced for all. And those rules would be rules across the board, because if everyone's equal, if everyone really is just the same and we're all equal and multicultural society is going to work perfectly and we've all got exactly the same physical and mental traits, if all of this that they're pushing down our throats is actually true, then it should be one rule for all.
But it's not.
It shouldn't be one rule for them and one rule for another, because then you're creating what they claim to be railing against. The establishment claims they rail against racism, against an apartheid state, against a two-tier justice system. But the two-tier justice system does exist, but it disenfranchises white people. It doesn't disenfranchise minorities. In fact, it raises up minorities. So if they use the N-word, if they use certain slurs, if they behave in a certain manner, these things are absolutely acceptable for them. But if a white person was doing it, it becomes absolutely unacceptable. But because you have this two-tier system, you have very, very awful cases that you so rightly shone a spotlight on, where you have a young girl who isn't even thinking about race. She's not even thinking about the issue of race. In fact, she should be the exact kind of person that the system and the establishment loves, because she doesn't even think of race. She just bought a song that she liked and she sang along to the song that she liked. Well, is she doing anything wrong? Well, she is, because she's white and because she said a word that was on the song that she bought from a store that was legally allowed to sell the song. There was no repercussions for the people who recorded it, sold it. There was no repercussions for the people who produced it, but there was repercussions for the girl who sang along because she happened to be white. And when you put it in those terms, which is basically truthful, and you put it in that context, which is the only context really you should look at it in, this great hypocrisy, you can see that something as small as buying a CD and singing along to a song can backfire on a white girl and turn her into a social pariah. And in today's society, there is nothing worse than being called a racist, being called an anti-Semite, being called a bigot or a hater. In fact,
doesn't bother me. Bring it. The more labels, you know, I wear
the more labels, yeah, but there's nothing worse. You know, in today's society, there are more newspaper articles trying to normalize sexual deviancy. There are lighter sentences being handed out to pedophiles and rapists. But if you're a racist, if you're accused of that, there's nothing worse. It's basically like being accused of a witch, being accused of being a witch in the Middle Ages. There isn't a defense. You know, you get thrown into the watering hole, and if you float, you get burnt, and if you sink, well, you're dead, but you're not a witch. So either way, you're done for.
So you're going to get a bigger punishment for being called a racist. Or you're going to get a bigger punishment for what they think your behaviour or your action has been. Classic example, Kevin, I can't remember his surname, that died in jail, that left bacon outside the mosque. He is a really good example. So he left bacon outside the mosque. Who did he hurt? Really, who did he hurt? Bricks, because mosque is made of bricks. So he hurt a building. You know, he didn't hurt anybody, really. At the end of the day, he didn't hurt anybody. He left bacon outside the mosque. And he got jailed for 12 months. And then you have the man that preaches, not necessarily that mosque, but you have the man that preaches. So you have the imam that preaches in that mosque, or you have the teacher that's teaching Islamic prayers to children in that mosque that decides that, you know what, this little 11-year-old girl, and sexually abuses her, doesn't go to jail. He doesn't go to jail because his wife can't speak English, so his wife will suffer because so you've hurt nobody really. You've hurt somebody's feelings. Toughen up a little bit, dry your eyes and get over it. It's a building. Nobody's been hurt. Nobody's been damaged. Nobody has trauma. Nobody's going to suffer for the rest of their goddamn life because a stinking old savage has sexually abused her. Look at the difference. So he gets 12 months in jail and he walks free. Another one as well, and it's not just Muslim men that are walking free. White paedophiles are walking free as well. Paedophiles, just paedophiles. I just used that example because it's a mosque and it's a man in the mosque to show the craziness of it. But, you know, you could type online something about Jews. We'll just talk about Jews. You could talk, because that's illegal at the moment. They're trying to make Islamophobia a crime. So at them, you know, you could teach your dog, you could teach your cat, because I have 2 cats. So I could teach my cat every time I say Hitler, it raises its little front paw. And put a video on the internet, and they could come to my door, knock on my door and say, you know, you've offended all these Jewish people who haven't actually really even bothered. They've not been offended, but they've decided that I've offended all these Jewish people, so they'll spend all this time taking me to court, threatening to jail me. That's almost going to be like a crime, whereas children that are actually hurt and continue to be hurt, they don't have enough police and they don't have enough manpower, I've been told, to physically go to every single door where there's men and women that are downloading images of children being abused. And where has this, you know, exploded from? You know, society should be evolving, so we should be evolved with technology and all other things. But we seem to have, like you said, spoke earlier about degeneracy, we seem to have gone down to the depths of hell almost, where I always say that the one thing that should unite, and we often talk about the whole paedophilia thing, that the one thing that should unite us all, that we should all be standing on the same platform. So somebody from the far left, you know, real Nazis, so-called real Nazis, Islamists, every spectrum, everybody should all be on the same stage, on the same platform, saying, let's stamp out the rape of children. Let's all fight together. I was speaking to somebody on Gab yesterday, and we were speaking about, you know, the paedophilia, and she had said that she would like to see 1 million people marching through the streets of London for the victims of rape gangs. And it's not just, you know, we know that it's not just Muslim men that rape the girls that are groomed and trafficked, and it's not just white girls. There are Muslim girls, there are Sikh girls, and it's Muslim men and white men and Chinese men and, you know, black men and Sikh men, Hindu men, Jewish men, you know, all sorts of men. Where is this, as a society, have we marched to protect children from being sexually abused? All these women and all these women's charities, you know, a women's march and whatever else, they'll get women, they'll galvanise hundreds of thousands of women to march through the streets of London with their pink pussy hats on because Trump said something. Trump didn't rape any children, but because he said something that goes back to hurt their feelings, they'll march and protest against him. But knowing that there's children, you know, if they don't want to accept that there's Muslim rape gangs, fair enough, don't. You know, all of those that don't accept that will tell you that the biggest percentage of paedophiles in the UK is white men. So march against the white men raping children then. So where is the march? Where are the protests? And I think...
I was going to say that there's never going to be protests against that. And there's never going to be protests against that because the establishment, and specifically the media, have relentlessly pushed for this sexual revolution that has normalized every form of deviancy and degeneracy imaginable. And the final stop on that train line towards Sodom and Gomorrah is, of course, paedophilia. That is the final destination for these people who are piloting the sexual revolution. The people driving it, the people pushing it forward, are pushing it towards the acceptance of sexual deviancy and sexual activity with children. We're already seeing notable publications interviewing paedophiles. We're seeing notable publications interviewing people who have claimed to be in relationships with animals, claimed to be in incestuous relationships. It's all disgusting. But you can see the acceptance of paedophilia from the people who are pushing the gay pride agenda. If you go, I'd ask you this, right? If you had a young son, if you had a son who was 11 years old, would you take that boy to a strip club?
No.
No. Why wouldn't you take the boy to a strip club?
Because it's not the place for children.
Because it's sexualized, yes?
It's not.
But I would say, if you took that boy to gay pride, you would be called a hero. If you took the boy to a strip club, you'd be seen as a monster. You took the boy to gay pride, you'd be seen as a hero. But there is far more deviancy, degeneracy, nudity, and horrific going-ons at those gay pride events than there'd ever be in a strip club. I've seen images from gay pride events where people have been dressed from head to toe as leather-clad dogs, in bondage outfits, men exhibiting full frontal nudity, people walking down the street waving sex toys, waving giant vibrators, people with obscene messages written across them, people engaged in graphic sexual acts in public places. At one of these gay pride events, people were handing out lollipops shaped as penises, and men were walking down the street sucking penis-shaped lollipops. Now that's in broad daylight in a public area, and if you take your child to that event, you would be called a hero. The liberal establishment would praise your parenting skills. Yet if you took your child to a strip club, you'd be held up as a pariah. But ironically, there is less sexual content on view at a strip club and less degenerate deviancy than you would see at a gay pride event in broad daylight on a Saturday, a shopping day, in the middle of any town or city centre around the UK. And doesn't that just put it in perspective? I mean, if you took your 11-year-old boy to a strip club, what would he see? Some naked boobs? Well, that's not anywhere near as vile as the things you would see at a gay pride event. And if anyone doubts what I'm saying, just Google these things. You know, and the police stand by and have pictures taken with men who are in different states of undress, in people in BDSM gear, and it's allowed to happen in our streets.
And they hold the leash of the adult, you know, the men and the women in the dog outfits. The police stand and hold the leash. The BBC shared an image from Gay Pride in London, and it was an image of 3 really old men dressed in little pink dresses, you know, so they're dressed as little baby girls, you know, very, very young baby girls, and that is where is the pride in that?
It's degenerate, it's foul. And what's worse is now at these pride events, you have these young transgender boys or these child drag queens dancing for grown men. Well, I can tell you this now, okay? That is one of the sickest and most vile things I've ever seen. To take a young boy, to dress him as a girl or as a drag queen or in a little tutu and have him dancing for a group of gay men. And there's actually been a case where an adult New York nightclub had one of these child drag queens perform, and men stood around stage throwing money at the child. And all of this is smiled upon. And you can see where it's going. If this was about...
So all of this is smiled upon, and they all clap their hands and they cheer, and it's Desmond. I think it's Desmond Amazing. It's his choice, and he's known since he was 2 years old that he wanted to be a drag queen, and he does drag kids events. So go to Afghanistan, where you have Bachabazi, where you have the dancing boys. So in Afghanistan, you have the Taliban and the other Afghani men, but really the Taliban are notorious for it as well, where they dress little boys up as little girls, put makeup on them, they all sit around in this big circle, and this little boy is forced to dance for them, and they give money and whatever else, and then whoever chooses him, whatever one picks him, and then he's obviously sodomized. So they're disgusted by that, but they're not disgusted by this. and I think I read something about the Desmond Amazon where, you know, one of the men in the audience had said, you know, how turned on he was by Desmond Amazon and how hot he was at dancing. And it's in that nightclub environment, you know, most nightclub environments will have, all nightclub environments will have alcohol, so everybody's drinking, and a lot of drugs will be getting taken. And in gay clubs, you know, there's a lot of poppers being sniffed, everybody's really high, and it's very, like you say, a very sexualized environment. A lot of people go out dancing just to dance. Loads of people go out dancing to pool. It's not any different in a gay nightclub. And to see a 10-year-old boy, you know, it's just disgusting. I don't agree with it at all.
When you're 2 years old, you don't have any idea of sexuality. Now, if you're homosexual, that is a sexual preference. To be gay is a sexual preference. It's who you find sexually attractive. It's who you want to sleep with. It's who you want to have sexual relations with. And for a 2-year-old to be considering sexual relations, that has to be the most twisted, sickening, and downright stomach-churning thing you could consider. But its parents, Desmond's parents, have basically implanted this garbage in his mind, almost like a social experiment. This isn't natural. It's not normal. It's gross perversion. And I shudder to think the sights that little boy has seen. Because people only need to scroll down my Twitter account. I try and post as much of this stuff as I can to show people how far-reaching and widespread it is now. But you see magazine spreads with child drag queens cuddling naked men. It's absolutely horrific. This is basically the accumulation of the Frankfurt School's sexual revolution, and the final destination is a free-for-all where paedophilia, incest, and bestiality will be absolutely normalized. And again, if you speak out against it, you'll be the bigot. You'll be the hater. You'll be the transphobe. You'll be the homophobe. You won't understand, and they'll bamboozle you with all these crackpot terms like non-binary. Oh, it's a non-binary person. Incorrect. Incorrect. People are male or female. That is binary. You know, but the fact is now, it's all about how people feel. You were talking about feelings earlier. Well, if a man feels like a woman, he's a woman. I'm afraid he's not. He's just suffering from some kind of mental illness, some kind of delusion, you know. But now society buys into this. Society has to be compassionate. And we were talking about people being dragged off. Well, people are being dragged out of their homes now and are being taken away by the police in the night for tweeting to people, for tweeting to men dressed as women, for saying to a man dressed as a woman, sorry fella, you're a bloke. Yeah. The police around, 10 minutes later and you're dragged away. But the same police who are absolutely useless and completely ineffective when it comes to dealing with real crime have said that they don't have the funding to visit victims of burglary. Well, burglary is a real crime. It really affects somebody. It really damages your life. It damages your possessions. It harms you financially. It makes you feel very unsure of being in your own home. It can affect you on
lasting effect. You know, it's an ongoing effect. It's like you said, you're going to be scared of being in your home. You're telling me that, you know, you want to be called, I don't know, Margaret, because you identify as female, and me saying to you, shut up, Mark. And then you're reporting me to the police, you know, or did you just misgender me? And the whole tranny thing and reading stories to toddlers in libraries, that, you know, we spoke about this on your show as well. If I had walked into a library, I used to take my little one to libraries all the time. If I had walked into a library and there was this big drag queen sitting with the big full-on makeup, full-on drag, I'd have taken my little one straight back out. And they claim that it's to make children accept, you know, and be tolerant towards the trans. Most trannies are night owls, so you don't tend to see them walking down your high street with the full drag stuff on, and you know, the full makeup, heels, dresses. You don't see them walking down the street because they're night owls. So they'll go out nighttime clubbing with other drag queens. During the day, they're usually sleeping. So, you know, a lot of trannies have mental health issues. They have addiction. So where are we going to teach these little 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds to be tolerant when they don't see them? So I have a friend that has a profoundly disabled son, and he's in a wheelchair. And when we go out, you see 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-old and older almost walking into walls because they can't stop staring at this boy in his wheelchair. Of course, he's profoundly disabled. So why not teach children at that age to be tolerant of somebody that they're going to be seeing on a regular basis? There's lots of profoundly disabled people out there, but really, why not just teach them to be kind? You teach children to be kind, and whether they see somebody in drag or whether they see somebody in a wheelchair, they're going to be kind.
Well, what I'll say about the drag queens in libraries, and this is a very, very interesting thing, because when you see these drag queens who are performing in front of children, several of them have been outed as sex predators. Several of them have been outed as paedophiles, people who have got serious sexual crimes on their record. And the other thing is, look at the costumes they're wearing. The most famous of these drag queens who does the library reading had satanic horns protruding from its head, and down the horns ran what looked like blood. They looked like horns that had been used to gore an animal. Now, I don't know if you've ever, if any of your viewers are sort of familiar with the fantasy world of Warhammer 40,000. But in Warhammer 40,000, there are these demons that come out of a rift in space and try to kill humans, and they're called demons of Slanesh. And this drag queen looked like one of these hell spawns, looked like one of these demons. You know, you've got this bizarre facial makeup, you've got these blood-drenched horns, and at the same time a flowing dress, and all the children are sat around mesmerized by this monstrous demon, by this monstrosity, and all the parents are there hoping that they're going to get some points on their progressiveness diary, you know, their progressiveness chart. Oh, we've been good parents today, we've got some more progressiveness points. But what damage is that doing to your child? I mean, how many children would be terrified?
How many children have nightmares from that? They won't tell you that their children had nightmares.
It is the stuff of nightmares. I mean, the fact that these people are doing what looks like modeling themselves on demons from science fantasy fiction says it all. What kind of person would model themselves on a demon and then go and read to children? And you hear people like Alex Jones saying, this is all a satanic sex cult, and people write that off. People write that off as nonsense.
Mentally ill. You've got to be mentally ill to dress up like that and to go where little children are. You have to be. There has to be a... because sometimes I look at things and I think, is it just me? Like, am I just really, you know, the odd one out here? And then I think, and again, there's that there are loads, there's thousands of people that think like me but are too scared to say anything because they're going to, you know, there's another label to add on to, you know, you're not a racist but you're a transphobe. You know, and again, you know, what percentage of the population in the UK are trannies? How many trannies?
A tiny percentage, but the fact is, we are now legislating for these tiny percentages. It's not about the majority. It's about whatever crackpot minority the establishment can put on a pedestal and pass new laws to protect. And the whole of society is legislating itself. It's like these, you know, genderless bathrooms. It's like you'll have one man who will decide that he's a woman and he wants to go in the women's bathroom. So every woman has to endure the indignity of some pervert stood in the changing room leering at them because he's decided that on that day he identifies as a woman. I mean, as a mother, how would you feel about a man deciding on the day he was a woman and wanting to follow you and your daughter into the changing rooms and watch you
Terrifies the living daylights out of me. So we're making all these rules. We're allowing mass immigration. After 2020 is even increasing, and they're making it a crime now that we, you know, I can't say to you because this is for BitChute, so it doesn't, YouTube can't do anything to me because I don't put it on YouTube, but I can't say to you on certain channels, I think mass immigration has to stop. I think it's wrong. You know, we're only a small island. We already have enough issues to deal with. We've had to make new laws for FGM. We've had to make new laws for forced marriage. There was talk about making new laws for breast ironing. So you've got all these people coming from different cultures, some really, really backward cultures, cultures where women are just, you know, easy meat. White women are slags, you know, women that are uncovered are slags and are game, and you can do what you want to them, and they're coming in. So there's all this mass immigration going on. At the same time, there's these new laws, genderless toilets. So you're Arthur or you're Mohammed, and tomorrow you identify as Miriam, and you're just going to go into this toilet where this mum and her young children have gone into. It's just a recipe for disaster, and more rape and more trauma and more. I don't know, are they trying to take us down that road where we just don't go out? Women don't go out. But then again, you're seeing the increase of the rape of men, and that's something that's very rarely spoken about, because I always say that we should talk about paedophilia. I've done a show on it with my soul sister where I think we should all talk about paedophilia. We should be able to stand at the school gate and talk about it. You're out for drinks with your friends, you can talk about it at the bar, you all sit and talk about it at the dinner table, because at the moment paedophilia is such, they keep it a taboo subject, so they keep it, you know, something that's really, really shameful, but the only person that the shame is placed on is the child. So it's the child that feels shame because nobody talks about it, it's not open, it's a very, very taboo subject. Women are lucky and girls are lucky that we can talk to each other, we're encouraged to speak to each other, because men and women are completely different. So women can talk to other women, women can approach an auntie, a big sister, their mum, and tell them what's going on. Boys, you know, that shame is, I believe, you know, a lot worse for boys and for men. So if you know, if John's walking down the road and another, you know, Peter or Mohammed drags him in the bushes and rapes him, he's not going to tell people. There's this huge shame, and we've got that with mass immigration going on as well, and another whole topic that we can discuss another time, where in a lot of these countries like Afghanistan and Iraq and in Pakistan, children approach puberty and children are separated. So boys and girls are not allowed to mix. Cousins are not allowed to mix. Just girls are in one place and boys are in another place. So when you hit puberty, regardless of where you are in the world, it's the same for all of us. What happens in these countries where we're seeing the mass immigration coming from when they're separated? So a lot, not all, obviously not all, but a lot of Muslim men's first sexual experience is with another man. So whether it's they've been raped by the uncle, whether it's they've, you know, had sex with their best friend, because there's no females around, they're not allowed to, and females have got to be virgins, so they're not allowed to, all of that stuff. So you've got the mass immigration coming in, and you've now starting to see an increase in the rape of men. But we don't talk about that either, because that's anti-immigration or something.
Well, no, but there's lots of things that are linked with immigration. I mean, obviously, the growing rate of rape of men is something that's very worrying. But just look at London. Look at the growth in knife crime. I mean, in the last few weekends, we've been witness to some of the most horrific crimes imaginable. There was the sickening and very, very distressing attack on a pregnant woman. A pregnant woman stabbed to death, and eventually the knife wounds took their toll on the child. The child died as well. The child survived several days afterwards, but
Absolutely.
tragically, the child died also. And then I think it was the weekend following that, a mother and her 3 children were knifed in their own home by an attacker. Now, I always note that if the attacker, you can always tell, the longer it takes for the press to reveal the race or ethnicity of the attacker, the more likely it is the attacker isn't white. You know, the longer it takes for them to reveal the description, the more likely it is that the attacker isn't white. But we've seen this rise in knife crime, but we're importing people from places in the world where dealing with things with a machete, dealing with a problem with a knife or a machete is the norm. And you then see these heartbreaking cases where you have a father and his son walk onto the train, and the father accidentally brushes past this black man, and he turns around and stabs the father to death in front of his own son. I mean, not only does the young boy lose his father, but he has to watch his own father be stabbed to death. I mean, that boy, what has he gone through? What is he going to go through for the rest of his life? He will go through nightmares, he will go through flashbacks, but will he go through guilt? Will he go through some kind of survivor's guilt where he wishes he'd done more, where he agonizes that maybe if he'd stopped this brute, he could have saved his father? But this is a victim. This is another white victim of the multicultural project. And when you look at this knife crime in London, overwhelmingly, it is based around these immigrant communities. But you've got all of these people, police commissioners, politicians, media pundits, and they're all scratching their heads. Why could it be? Is it YouTube? Is it
poverty? That's the latest one. It's poverty. So in Scotland, we had, a really bad, knife crime, really bad. So they did the stop and search. So we don't have a problem with knife crime. But to do a stop and search in London, and the majority of knife crime and the majority of young people that have died are black. And the majority of people that are doing the stabbing are black. So then why is it racist to do a stop and search?
And Theresa May, she forced the end of stop and search, and she actually commissioned a report into stop and search, hoping to find that it was racist. Yet the report into stop and search clearly showed that the police weren't applying stop and search in a racist manner, and stop and search was reducing knife crime within the black community. Yet Theresa May still forced the police to drop stop and search because she's a completely soulless witch committed to the multicultural project. But in doing that, she has unleashed this torrent of crime from communities that need this harsh policing, because without it, they default to something that we simply don't understand. And I've seen enough videos on the internet of brutality in places like Africa to understand that the mentality of people is different, because cultures are different, ways of life are different, and sometimes those cultures and ways of life simply aren't compatible. And you can't take people from nations where knife crime and machete killings are the norm, where female genital mutilation's the norm, where visiting a witch doctor is the norm, where raping newborn babies to cure yourself of AIDS is the norm. You can't take people from nations where they are social norms and place them into a high IQ, high trust, high culture society in Europe and expect those people to perform in the same way as the indigenous people do. But for saying that, I am literally castigated as some kind of devil. And when we began this show tonight, you said, a lot of people will be shocked I'm talking to you. Well, I hope as we're drawing close to the end of this 90-minute segment, that people who have stuck with us for the 90 minutes can see that what I'm saying is not hate-filled bile, but in fact, It's common sense, and it's common sense that's built off the back of facts, and it's backed up by facts. It's backed up by real-world observations. We're not motivated by hate. We're motivated out of a desire to protect Western civilization and to ensure a future for our children, and a future for our children in a place that is morally upstanding, clean, decent, safe, a place where they won't be preyed upon by these satanic paedophiles, a place where they won't be the victims of knife crime. And I'm sorry, but if wanting all of those things makes me a social pariah, well, so be it. Because if people don't stand up now, if people don't stand up today, if people don't make a stand now, it's very likely that there won't be a tomorrow, in the sense that we want there to be a tomorrow, because things are getting so much worse so quickly. And the demographic trend will result in white British people, in the indigenous population of these islands, being a minority by 2060. And if things are bad when white British people are an 85% plus majority, if things are bad then, how bad are they going to be for our children and grandchildren when they're a minority across the entire nation?
You only have to look to Muslim countries and see how minorities are treated to see how your children and grandchildren are going to be treated. But, you know, going back to the beginning and people saying, oh, she's talking to Mark Collett. I'd never heard of you. And a few years ago on Twitter, Soul Sister had retweeted something of yours. She's a great admirer of yours. So she had retweeted something of yours, and I liked it, so I automatically retweeted it. And it was an image, and it was the Quran in the toilet, and it said hate crime, and it was the Bible in the toilet, and it said art. So I really liked the image, and I retweeted it. And this guy that followed me commented underneath it and said, do you know who you're retweeting? And I said, no, I liked it, so I retweeted it. And he said, he's a Nazi. And I said, okay, but I still liked, you know, I might not like all those things, but I like this, what he posted, and I retweeted it. And he said, you should have screenshot it and retweeted it as your own. And I said, but it wasn't mine, it was his, so I retweeted it. And he said, if you don't unretweet it, I'm going to have to unfollow you. And I said to him, well, you just unfollow me, because one, you're not my dad. You don't get to police who I tweet and retweet, you know, on social media. And two, it's not like I'm having him round for dinner. I've retweeted something that I like, and it's that, isn't it, that there are some people that I like a lot of what they say. There's nobody really that I agree with 100%.
But you would invite me round for dinner?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Just checking that. Now we've got matching black shirts. I expect your invitation to be following shortly.
I got told black is very slimming, so I wore black. But yeah, you can come round for dinner.
One of the things that's really interesting, like as we're getting, you know, as we're getting towards the end of the show, is I just want to say that I get called a lot of things, but we've been friends for some time now, and we've got on pretty much very well since the first time we spoke on the phone. I remember you called me when I was having some work done on my house, and we had a bit of a chat, and I had to go to speak to the workmen. Then I came back and we chatted some more, and I remember I had a little drive then. I think we spoke for about well over an hour on our first
almost 2 hours, I think it was.
It was, yeah, we just got on really well. And one of the most amazing things is when you actually read or hear or view all the things that are said about me, and then you actually see the reality. You see the kind of relationship we have, the kind of relationship I have with people like Jessie Lee Peterson, the kind of relationship I have with a variety of people of other ethnicities from around the world. You know, we've had people from all over the world on my show, my weekly show. You know, we had Syrian Girl on the show. You know, we've had Roosh V on the show. I was on a debate with against 4 people of Jewish origin, and I was joined by a man who was of Indian heritage, and I got on very well with him. And you can actually see that the media smear operation is in such overdrive that they have got so lost in their own fantasy. And they actually do believe people like me are the devil, but the truth is so very different. And I believe that that's why they're so scared. That's why they're so desperate to deplatform people like you and I.
I say to those people that tell me you're a racist and that I shouldn't speak to you, is that people say the same about Tommy Robinson, but you all go out and support him. Look, I have a lot of time for Tommy, as you know, but the media and a lot of people, not just the media, there is a lot of people out there that believe the lies that the media tell about Tommy. And I try and say to them, it's the exact same with Mark, you know, so.
Well, hopefully this will have won a few people over. And I hope people understand that, you know, I raise a lot of important points. And, you know, I do raise points, you know, about people who are involved with Tommy Robinson. But I also think he shows a great degree of courage. He shows a great degree of fortitude. And he's done amazing work in highlighting issues, specifically issues about Islamic immigration, Islamic groups, gangs. Yeah, all of these things. But there is another important issue, and I think we've raised those issues tonight. And the issues I raise are issues of demographic change. I do not want to see the indigenous British people become a minority in their own homeland. And equally, I am willing to raise the issue of the disproportionate role that Jews play in the media and in the pro-immigration lobby, which is something you yourself have become very awakened to in the last few months.
Yeah, and it's, you know, it's not a bad thing. It's not racist. It's not anti-Semite and all these labels that they want to hit us with. And I'll keep doing it. So if you say that you're a human rights activist, then everybody should be held to the same standard. And if you're speaking the truth, then you need to speak the truth about everything. And I'll always continue to speak the truth, whatever labels, whoever doesn't talk to me, whoever falls out with me, whatever groups I get kicked out of, whatever this, whatever that, doesn't bother me. Nobody controls me because nobody pays me. I've never ever done a GoFundMe. I've never asked for a Patreon. You know, I do what I do because I do it from the heart. Yeah, so we'll leave it there. But thank you so much for coming on Observation, from being my first guest.
Well, thank you so much. Originally, we were only going to do an hour, and we've done 90 minutes, and I've really, really enjoyed it. I think it's been an excellent, hopefully it's been an excellent introduction for your guests or for your viewers to me, and I hope that people can now see through some of the lies. And I just want to thank you for inviting me on, and thank you for coming on my show, because you came on my show a few weeks ago. We had a few technical hiccups. Google seemed to want to scupper the whole thing, but this has been excellent. I've really enjoyed tonight.
And I really enjoyed your show as well. It was, you know, the feedback I got as well. So for people saying that you're this Nazi and all your followers are Nazis, the feedback I got from that show was pretty amazing.
Well, I look forward to working with you in the future as well, because I think we have an awful lot of causes in common, and I think we're much better served, you know, working together for that better world than we are nitpicking over the few things that we don't agree with each other on. So again, thank you so much for having me on. It's been an absolute pleasure, a great way to spend an hour and a half. And I hope all the viewers really, really, really enjoy it and start to investigate a few of the things that we've discussed.
Just open your minds a little bit. That's all that we ask. But thank you very much.